So I have a very basic rough shape of my island, and I want to get in and start refining this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten out my view. I'm going to look at this from more of a top-down view, or maybe I'll even click on the y-axis in this widget and get an absolute top-down view. So I'm looking straight down the y-axis. And what I'm going to do is I just want to fill in the rest of the landscape. Some of this is still submerged, and when I select my daylight simple water, I've raised my water up on the y-axis by 1 meter, and I'll continue to noodle with that and adjust it a little bit. But it's important to point out that my water is set to 1 on the y-axis, because the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my terrain. And rather than using the raise lower terrain brush, I'm going to move to the next brush over, the paint height brush. And if you remember, the paint height brush allows me to set the absolute height of the brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to set it to 1, because 1 would occupy the same space in the same space as the water. The terrain would occupy the same space as the water, and you start to get some overlapping geometry, and things would look a little strange. But if I set this brush to a height of 1.5, and I'll make this a rather large brush size, and I'll set the opacity pretty high. When I go in and paint, you can see that I'm lifting that terrain just up above the water. In fact, I'm lifting it about half a meter above the water. So I'm going to go through and I'll paint in, and I could use this same technique to push the landscape down underneath the water as well. So if I wanted to expose a little bit of water and I wanted to keep it pretty shallow, I could do something like maybe 0.7. That is underneath the water line, and so as I start to paint, I'm revealing the water. So I'll use this technique just to really quickly rough in my island and really kind of get my island flattened out. So I'll start to reduce the size of the brush and kind of push and pull the terrain to get it just a real general shape going here. So if I'm starting to add too much information over here, I'll just send that, let's say to maybe 0.5, and that'll allow me to kind of push the landscape back down. So I'll start to play with different brushes and really refine the edge of the terrain. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to start to play with some of the topology and really kind of get the landscape to start to pop up above the ground. And so I'll go back to my raise brush here, and I'll just really just kind of create some real quick information here, just to kind of establish a little bit of a height here. You know, something to walk around on. I'll come back in and really spend some time adding some more information. That's pretty much, that looks pretty good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to start to add some really basic textures here. Now, I have this existing set of textures because I imported the terrain assets, so I can jump into the texture brush and I can edit and add additional textures, and I'll just select a new texture. And I could add things like, we have this grass hill, that's a pretty decent texture. I'll add that, make sure it's selected. I'll make sure I'm using a pretty large brush here, so I'll just kind of move that down. And I'll go back through and I'll start to paint, and I'll just kind of, you know, start to rough out some of this information of what I want to be grass, what I want to be sand, just to get some additional information in here. Now, I'm with the basic assets that I'm starting with in Unity, I only have a couple of textures that I can use. I have this grass hill, it's a pretty good texture. Grass rock, that looks pretty good. There's this good dirt texture, and otherwise, I do have this cliff texture as well, but otherwise, those are about all of the landscape textures that I have. So I want to go out and I either want to create some textures, I want to pick up some additional textures, and there's a really great place where I could pick up just a handful of extra textures. If I go to the window pull-down menu, I can go to the Unity Asset Store. And the Asset Store is a place where I can pick up free assets, or I can purchase existing assets. And there's a really great terrain pack. If I go into the top free assets, there's a couple of free assets in here, and the one that I'm going to grab is the terrain assets. And inside the terrain assets, there are some additional trees and bushes and foliage and grass and textures. And what I'm going to do is I could just download this, or I could choose from this little drop-down menu to download and import. So what I'll do is I'll download and import. I have to log in. I have to have a username and a profile in order to do this. So I'll log in and I'll pause this while it downloads, and when I relaunch the video, we'll see that I'll have some additional assets. So I've logged in, I've chose to download and import, and I'm presented with the import package. I'm going to leave everything checked, and I'm just going to hit the import button. And once that's done, Unity just imports this as if it were a local package. And in fact, once it's done importing, I'll have these assets that are bundled with my project folder. So this is, essentially downloading from the Unity cloud. So there are a great list of assets. There's a great number of assets that are available through the Unity store, the Unity Asset Store. Many of these are paid for assets, and there seems to be quite a market out there for folks that are generating 3D models, textures, and other game assets, and making those available through the Unity Asset Store. So now that I've downloaded these assets, I can see that I now have a Terrain Assets folder, and I have some additional content. I'm not gonna look through this folder at this point because I can go to Edit and Add Textures, and now when I select texture, I'll find some new textures that are included here. So I can see that I have this grass meadow, a light and a dark. I have a grass lawn, so I have this grass mud. So there's forest floor. So I have a number of new textures, and I'll continue to experiment and just use these methods of painting in some rough textures. I'll continue to play with the topology here and raise and lower the terrain height and play with some of these texture brushes just to start to rough out and directly translate the concept sketch into my landscape. In the next presentation, we'll refine the volcano a bit, and we'll take a look at some other additional environmental assets, and we'll do that in the next presentation.